Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude, revisiting the Tribunal. And for that, we have two guests, Nalani Minton. She's assistant professor at School of Nursing, and she's the director of ʻIKE PONO. Thank you for coming, Nalani. And we have Ulla from the College of Social Sciences. She is the Director of Civic Engagement for the College of Social Sciences, and she teaches at Ethnic Studies as well. So thank you for coming over. So, Nalani, we can begin the program by doing the Oli, as you wished, and then we can talk about what does it mean revisiting the tribunal and what tribunal it is and so forth.
Okay. So in honor of Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell, who we refer to as Uncle Kekuni, and the 26 years since he convened the tribunal, I would like to give this Oli that was given in spirit at the time of the tribunal. E ho'okahi kahi mana'o, e ho'okahi pu'uvai, e ho'okahi malama pono, e ho'okahi aloha mau, e mau ke ea o ka aina i ka pono, ma lama lama, ma lama pono, nana i ke kumu, no na keiki. E aloha mau, e aloha mau, e aloha mau.
All right, that's a good tribute to Uncle Kekuni, actually. And to begin to revisit the tribunal. And so could you give us a context for the tribunal? What is the tribunal about? What was it 26 years ago?
Okay, so the foundation for tribunals at the international level came after the Second World War and the Holocaust and the genocide that had been visited upon many millions of people who were murdered during that time. And basically, in international law, if you're living with unjust laws, if you're living in occupied territory, if you're living under a situation where you've been assumed under colonization as part of another system other than your own naturally existing national status or kingdom status as we had as a nation state, then you can convene a tribunal. So Uncle Kekuni did this actually in honor of Kawaipuna Prajin also. And the tribunal was held on lands where people were being evicted from ancestral lands, Kanakamali, but many, many issues came forward at that time and then were taken to the UN Geneva convening of the Decade for Indigenous Peoples working groups. And now that has transformed into the Permanent Forum for Indigenous Peoples. And we're at the point where sustainability and climate change issues are catching everyone up globally into the same concerns about the kind of future that our next generations will face. So we wanted to revisit the tribunal, and there are three different areas that I've kind of outlined as cultural context. So one is that the spirit of our people protects the land and all that nourishes us. And through our right intentions, right actions, there will be the right outcomes. So these are from our cultural teachings of what is Pono. And then also the context that it is not enough to think about justice, but that we have to act to protect those who may not have a voice, including the earth, the natural world, the cosmos, and future generations. And the third context, indigenous context, is that inherent in the protection of those most at risk is the protection of us all, a basic tenet of human rights and common humanity.
Yeah, so actually This kind of reflects or expresses indigenous knowledge, actually, and we can talk about indigenous knowledge later on. And it shows how indigenous knowledge thinks not only of indigeneity itself, but of all of humanity and the earth, you know, where we live, you know. So it shows to me, as another indigenous person, but not from here, that in fact indigenous peoples can show or the way for saving the planet. I mean, ultimately, that's what our goal would be, or is, in fact, at this point. But before we go any further in this direction, I want to ask Ulla, in terms of you have been active, you had been active in the preparation for the tribunal. I know that because a lot of things happened from my office and Marian's office, you know, way back. So could you say something about the significance of the tribunal, you know, you know, complementing what Nalani was saying?
I sort of came to it from indigenous politics, global indigenous politics, through working with the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs. And at the point in time to gather so many people, so much knowledge in one place, to do status over what was the condition of the indigenous rights in Hawaii. I think that was a really humongous enterprise, but also very important and inspirational for indigenous struggles worldwide.
Yeah, and in terms of setting up a tribunal, there were invitations for 9 judges from around the world, you know, from Japan, from the Middle East, from other places, yeah. Could you say something about that? I mean, with the significance of those judges, yeah.
Well, one of the things that happens during an international people's tribunal is that it's a people's process. But then to report on it at the UN, you have to have people like Ulla and ʻIKE who represent NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to help organize you and educate you, you know, about how the system works and how you're able to move forward with the information that comes from the tribunal. So we had judges and witnesses and observers from other indigenous nations all over the world. And the 9 who came were basically grounded in law, but were very interested in indigenous law. So in contrast, you know, for Kanaka Maoli, our first law is kanawai, law of water. And so wherever we went, people spoke about kanawai. So they were very learned individuals and judges and attorneys working in all areas of civil rights and human rights. But for them, it was also an opportunity to understand that there are laws that predate the colonial systems, and that there are many, many millions of people who, during the colonization process, against their own will or uninformed, you know, consent, were swept up in colonization, which has to do with alienation of lands and the takings of lands, and, you know, the kind of depredation and destruction of natural resources and life sources that has been formulaic throughout the world. So we had a chance to give voice on the places that people are being evicted from, ancestral lands, to many, many, many different issues having to do with land and water, condition of health of people, issues about how do we survive in an economy that's not really ours, how do we protect our aina, how do we fulfill our own sacred responsibilities and obligations when we're removed from the direct representation of our lands. And these were all considerations and concerns of indigenous peoples worldwide. So we were within that context. One of the things that happened during the tribunal is that we spiritually went to each place on each island where we were being hosted and did ceremonies and preparations there. And Kumujanka Imikawa was very much involved, and he gave a prophecy chant about that as the oceans rise, so shall the people, especially the people of the Aina who are closest to our practices and traditions. And so sustainability was part of the discussion from the very beginning. And some of the context also when we went to the UN was that by that time, the apology law had been issued. And the apology law is a joint resolution of the US Congress that states our history and the illegal actions of the United States, but also has one clause that says, whereas the Native Hawaiian people are determined to preserve, develop, and transmit to future generations their ancestral territory, their cultural identity, in accordance with their own spiritual and traditional beliefs, customs, practices, language, and social institutions. So this also set up a context for us to go to the UN and participate for the decade, the 10 years, with probably 1,000 other indigenous nations.
Yeah, in fact, we have this DVD, I guess, the Tribunal, Kaha Okolokolo Nui Kanaka Mauli, People's International Tribunal, Hawaii, 1993. I'm going to just show it here so that, you know, people can know that there is some such thing if they want to know more about it, yeah? And so that one about the tribunal. Another one is this one from Lanai, a rare gift of beauty. I'll show this one. This is about the tribunal as well. Or?
Well, it's the other three thumbs that you have there are about sustainability.
Yeah, but this one.
And ahupua knowledge, and Lanai is also.
Yeah, okay. So here the relationship between the tribunal and those kinds of things we were talking about, like climate change, sustainability, and so forth. And later on, I'll show more of those ones. Ulla, you know, I know like you teach ethnic studies 320, which is Hawaii and the Pacific, and much of that has to do with the Pacific Islands, island nations. And we have like climate change, like is a daily kind of worry and concern for a lot of island peoples in the Pacific Ocean. And so in terms of looking at the tribunal and then looking at those other areas in the Pacific nations, that Pacific Island nations, whether they are quote unquote independent politically but not necessarily economically, or those people who are not even independent politically, like Tahiti, for instance, Rapa Nui, as another example. So could you say something about that, and then how you, like, as you are teaching, how you relate to those issues in terms of the tribunal? I mean, not necessarily directly, but, you know, tribunal issues and why the tribunal was held in the first place. Yeah.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I know.
So when we look at the Pacific today, climate change is a major issue. And some of the consequences of climate change are closely linked to the colonial history. And that's one of the big topics in the Ethnic Studies 320 class. It is one of those classes where we have a focus on sustainability, which is linked to a bigger effort here at the university to integrate issues around sustainability across the curriculum. So that's what I'm trying to do in practice in the class. So we do a lot of comparative talk when we're looking at different island nations. We're looking at the Pacific as a whole, as a connected whole, which are completely new perspectives for students, but it helps us understand what's happening other places and what will happen here. So the Marshall Islands is a great learning experience for the future, and a kick to do something about these things.
Yeah, you want to say more?
Well, there's also, Ulla has worked in this area a long time, but there's also the transmigration of peoples throughout the Pacific now because of the results and impacts of climate change, like king tides and rising oceans and atolls that don't have higher elevations. And part of what happens in Hawaii is that the contractual arrangements between peoples and nations in the Pacific and the U.S. government means that their next step is often to come to Hawaii either for health reasons or because they have this contractual agreement. But not everything is worked out to cover the expenses of their journey or their relocation. So there's a lot of upheaval happening right now for people who are having to leave their homelands. And that's probably a topic that you could get into on another show in a lot of detail. But many people's governments are, and them personally, are either buying land in Aotearoa or Australia or Fiji and other areas where there are higher elevations to move to. One of the things that came up during the tribunal is that the formula for colonization has to do with commodifying resources for profit.
Making resources as commodities,
yes. And for indigenous peoples, our main relationship with the natural world is as a parent, as family, as relatives, as ancestors. And so a lot of our relationship to Aina and to water and the ocean has to do with our responsibilities, our kuleana, to protecting the life sources. So life sources is such a completely different understanding of what everyone needs to survive. And through the ahua'a systems in Hawaii, this is one example of how we have always protected our lands and lived in places where the natural laws themselves rise up in the people, the behavior of the people, the conduct of the people, and the traditional knowledge and practices. And it's an example of what happens for most indigenous peoples, that there's such a conflict between the kind of destruction of life that comes with commodifying and turning everything into a profit incentive, and the ways of life that are naturally part of healthy and naturally existing nations that had to do with a constant and continuous communication with the land and nature. So we're at that point where there's sort of a combination of indigenous knowledge and wisdom, science, and technology to try to bring a biocultural perspective to the relationship between peoples and land. And it's one of the things that all peoples of the earth could learn more about from the indigenous nations, who are the longest nations, the First Nations of the earth. So those thousands and thousands of years of pattern recognition have given us instruction, have given us ways of life. But at this point, because the weather patterns are changing and the both polar regions are melting so fast, we have to adjust also. And part of indigenous knowledge of sustainability is that we have adjusted and lived through climate changes before.
Yeah, right. No, that's good. I want to show a couple of others in terms of climate change, sustainability, etc. For people like we knew, before they, passed on maybe and so forth. So I just want to put the Lanai one again to look at it in terms of, this kind of climate change and sustainability, etc. And then I'm gonna go to John Kaimikawa one, that to show the people that there are those resources that they can use for that. And in fact, we would also use in our classes at ethnic studies for that. So that's another one That's for, Ahupua'a, fish ponds, and lo'i. This is very dear to us because the one who did that and was featured in it was the late Marian Kelly, professor of ethnic studies. And she's an anthropologist. She was an anthropologist. So, Ulla, you want to talk about Marian and her role, both in terms of, sustainability, climate change, fighting for sustainability, etc., and then her role in the tribunal, because she saw the relationship between the two.
Okay, so Marian used to say that the way that we use the environment as humans, we all use the environment. We all need the resources, but Native Hawaiian culture enhanced the production, enhanced the use of the environment in a protective way, whereas the sugar plantations, for instance, would destroy the land. They would change the land completely. She often stressed that difference in attitude and connection with the land. And she did in practice many of the things that we are doing today that I think when she first started doing it didn't have terms linked to it. She would love to have worked on this place as Native Hawaiian place of learning, for instance, place-based education, all the way through. She would have been right up there. And a lot of her work is helping us doing that today. But in the mid-90s, she started working with a professor at the Kapiolani Community College that was an ethnobotanist. And they created a program to get students out and understand Hawaiian culture and the environment from an experiential perspective, which have developed over the years and become the Malama Ina Upua program that we're still running. We have 140, 50 students per semester that are working at least 25 hours in the community. And while they're doing that, they're learning about Hawaiian culture and place. So we're not the teachers, we're just making that connection. But it's truly very important that they get the sense of place. We just went through the reflections for this semester, and they clearly get a much deeper understanding of the need for being sustainable, the need for securing food for the future, preparing for natural catastrophes.
Yeah, I mean, this is important to show the relationship, at least in the Pacific Ocean, among the various indigenous populations, Pacific, ones. Yeah. You want to
One
say?
of the things that Marian also introduced to all of us was that as a lead anthropologist for so many years, she had interviewed a lot of the kupuna who lived the culture. And a lot of the ingenuity of the fish ponds, of creating water where there didn't appear to be water, like on the Kona coast, having knowledge of all of the lava tubes and how water comes up in springs in different areas, where there are streams that run when there's rain, but are not apparent when there's not, taking the ferns from the mountains and wrapping the roots, angling the rocks down into the roots so that moisture is captured, planting ulu so that from the highest forest, the ulu then creates a bridge to the coconut groves at the Kahakai, and you have these long clouds that come down and create more rain. The ingenuity of the fish ponds and being able to build ponds on fringing reefs, or to have an aerial experience of where the water flows on each side of each island, and how to create stabilized food production, even if there might not be the weather to go out and fish, at all times. Also, with the propagation of fish, knowing what the migration habits of fish are, whether they're pelagic going out to ocean and coming back, or whether they circle the island to spawn, and where the spawning takes place, so that there was a great amount of detail in relationship to How do you become a steward of the land? How do you relate to increasing the abundance of food production for what was estimated to be between 800,000 and 1 million people, nearly probably as many as are here now as residents. And she was able also to look at how the laws that came in with the formulas of colonization created adverse possession and eminent domain for the takings of land that separated and that created these unnatural divisions of people from life sources and from the resources, and the kind of destruction that caused not only as a foundation of the whole culture, but in the relationship with the natural world. So one of the things that we learned from the tribunal is that as far as inherent sovereignty goes, and in the public law I already quoted that the United States has acknowledged that we are inherently sovereign, there is a collective title in the land even from the ʻIʻi. And that the land itself being such, the parent to all of us, has created the Aloha Aina movements. During the Queen's imprisonment time, the Hui Aloha Aina gathered all of the signatures in the ku'e petitions from each ahupua'a. And the life of the land rose up in the people as a voice of the people against annexation, against the further disruption of our culture and our lands. So Marian was very key in bringing into people's awareness a lot of the details of how colonization did destroy our original concepts and practices.
Right. And this one, we have KU'e, the Hui Aloha Aina Anti-Annexation Petitions, 1897, 1898, compiled by you and Noe Silva.
Yes.
So I want to show it to show that there are like those resources, that people can take a look at.
And every
so on.
signature of over 40,000 Kanaka Maoli that were left at the time in 1897, 98 is included in that, showing a map of where we were all located, which lands, which islands, who we really were related to. And the way that all of those signatures were captured is very much a people's process, the way the tribunal is, where we as peoples ourselves have to be collectively conscious of what we have to do in our own self-determination, that we have to create the steps and the knowledge and the quantum leap to create a new paradigm. And it's being done. The university is very much a part of it, but also in many, many communities, people are restoring fish ponds or planting gardens or cultivating food.
Yeah, I want to make a couple of points, and I'd like for you, Ulla, to comment on it. I mean, the Hawaiians, in terms of their own system, pre-capitalist system, when capitalism came, it destroyed the whole thing, and really oppressed and repressed the indigenous population here. Is that, you were talking about, we now talk about high technology. I mean, all that detail about the ponds and the flow and the way things, plants and trees were planted, etc., shows that Hawaiians have grasped high technology at that level for that time, so that it allowed them to sustain about 1 million population. So I just wanted to say that, and then to have you comment on these things, Ulla.
Yeah. So right now at the university is a prime time to be focusing on these things. There's a lot of administrative support. There are a lot of initiatives. Many faculty and many students are interested in these issues and want to learn more. And to me, one of the most exciting things right now is to work across the disciplines. Marian were very interested in extremely technical stuff, in chemistry, biology, these things, while being an anthropologist. And I see that among many instructors and scholars today. So there is many initiatives that are trying to bring all this knowledge together to work to create a better future for us all, to maybe curb climate change, the effects of climate change before it's too late.
And adapt.
Yeah, right.
Ulla's being very modest because she's won many awards through the Sensor program, and she holds this annual water challenge to get more scientists and students and people working together on those issues. So I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, we will say a bit more. I just want to go back to the question of the tribunal, and if there are, do you have testimonies or something?
Can I just make one little point?
Yeah, sure.
That is about time that people listen and learn from others that truly know places.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, futurists who look at indigenous situations and are concerned about climate change or capitalist crisis and all of that, they say that, in fact, indigenous peoples, like in terms of Hawaiian, Kanaka or Iwi, can lead the way, show us the way for saving the planet, So it is interesting, like this indigenous knowledge, how important it is for now. It's not like we're not talking about, this kind of stereotyping, I don't want to go back to the grass shack and all that kind of stuff. That's really, I'm sorry to say, is ignorant. People who say this kind of stuff should educate themselves about the relevancy of indigenous knowledge to the many crises that we face now on this earth. What do you want to have? Do you have some testimonies or something?
Yes, there's so many, and Ulla is going to make sure that the website links are up for people to be able to examine all the testimonies. There were like 147 given, but I'd like to give an example of maybe one that brings in the aspects of sustainability, and that is that a testimony was given about how the contamination of water is measured in Hawaii. And it's measured from the top of the water table, whereas the water that we drink is from the bottom of the water table. And so in many ways, this is how some of the environmental standards are being what would you say?
Manipulated.
Okay, manipulated. But it has to do with the awareness that we need to have, like in Hoala Kanawai, when the laws of water are awakened in the people. Everyone knows where their source of water comes from, and all the different forms that water takes, and where water is being diverted, and how water is being used. And everybody's pretty familiar these days with the water battles, and especially for farmers or for Kanakamali or for the life of streams. For example, on Maui or on Oahu. And it's frustrating to have the water not being seen as a life source, but just being seen as a commodity to run businesses or to create more tourism venues or to water golf courses or whatever it is. But one of the things that Hokulea announced lately is that they want to clean up the Alawai within 7 years. So you kind of get the idea that with the ancient knowledge and the cooperation of different scientists who know the biochemistry of contamination and maybe how to correct that, that we have a way of possibly accelerating the process of reversing or of revitalizing. I know for Nainoa, because I was a Hokulea crew member for about 12 years, that a lot of what he learned in the planetarium is exactly the kind of example of using a tool of contemporary science to be able to go back in time or forward in time with the planetarium and to ask questions and to get used to the idea of having the positions of all the stars within your own mind. And then being able to go profoundly into any one area of ancient wisdom and knowledge allows you to connect with many, many other areas. And I kind of sometimes call this to myself the alchemy of common sense. Because for indigenous peoples, so much was learned from the land and from nature that the observer becomes the process of observing, becomes whatever is being observed. And it's all one system of knowledge, all one system of learning. So, you know, we've talked before about how carbon scrubbers and people being able to use albesia for non-carbon fuel, or these big carbon suckers that suck the carbon out of the air and turn them into carbon bricks for building, or increasing food production, but also drying our foods, powdering our foods, being prepared for the complexities of what climate change may bring, cleaning up toxicity, like the kupuna used to talk about using algae, using different kinds of limu to clean up the toxicity. And so I feel like there's kind of a great opportunity in a way for people to work quickly through pulling all the different disciplines together, like Ulla was saying, to not only combine wisdom with science and technology, but to create the solutions that we may not have had to look at before.
Yeah, good. Ulla, I mean, Nalani mentioned like you were so humble, etc. in terms of what you really do. So could you tell us something more about Sensa and what does it stand for and what you do at Sensa and some of the conferences, etc. And then we relate it to, you know, the notion of the tribunal and the concerns of the tribunal that relate to today.
Okay. SENSA stands for Science Education for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities, and was started as a national initiative out of a concern of a lack of interest in learning natural sciences among young people, and also very ineffective ways of teaching it. So as the name of the organization says, the initiative is have students actually become involved and do things that matter and get out there and do stuff. Over the years, the initiative has developed and included more social sciences. In fact, the first course that they were working on that was including social sciences was a course that was developed in the economics department here around climate change. But from 2014, where Native Hawaiian faculty also became involved with the Sensa ideas, we have, particularly here in Hawaii, led a very strong development in looking at indigenous knowledge, indigenous wisdom as a real basic component in any kind of science that you would do.
Yeah.
And this is sort of what we're working on with these annual institutes, where we bring people together with a strong interest and knowledge and experiences, and give them an opportunity to work together for 3 days and come out energized and with new ideas, new projects if you're a community partner, new curriculum assignments if you're faculty, ideas for research. It's a very energizing group of people, and it's people that are very skilled in these areas. We have our next grand challenge is focused on water, and it comes up in mid-May. One of the keynote speakers has just won is part of a very large grant that are looking into these things, Kiana Frank. But there are also instructors, even lecturers that have been working on these things for a long time and enjoy this opportunity to really develop their ideas with other people.
Yeah. Again,
So
yeah,
it's creating a
Yeah.
collaborative environment, not me teaching things.
Yeah,
The same as with
Yeah.
sending students out working in the environment. They're learning from the caretakers of the land,
That's,
and the land itself, not from me in that
Yeah.
sense.
That's great, actually. And before we go to what the UH is doing even more, and the censor is part of what the UH is doing. But before we go into that, I want to ask you, Nalani, about tell us some more about ʻIKE PONO, for instance, the one you director, ʻIKE PONO, and what you do and how it might be related to all these things, to the tribunal and to what's happening today.
Okay, great. Yeah, in 2001, when I came to teach at the university, there was a small group of Kanaka Maoli faculty that we all decided that we should create a system within a system at the university so that we could make pathways and opportunities for more Kanaka Maoli students and families to attend the 10 campuses. So one of the things that we did is create councils. And these councils are known as the Puko'a councils altogether, but each campus has their own, and one is Kuali'i Council. So my position and my program was sponsored and supported by the Kuali'i Council here at Manoa, so that I could have a social justice position to change the fact that the school that I was hired at had never hired a Kanaka Maoli in over 85 years. And I'm the first Kanaka Maoli tenured in that long a time, even though my background is clinical psychology and not nursing. It was a way to hold the door open and to create more of an awareness and a concern and to advocate for and to help develop a program that now we have graduated over 420 Native nurses. And by 2020, we will have graduated about 500. And they're out in our communities at risk and being leaders in clinical work and in research and writing and publishing. And it changed the whole dynamic of recovery from intergenerational trauma, where if people are held in victimization for so long, they don't have the opportunity to completely heal. So that's just one program, and there's many. Like at Manoa, there's probably 40 Native Hawaiian programs embedded in law or medicine or in all different areas, and we work in an interdisciplinary way with each other also. So like at the College of Health Sciences and Social Welfare, social work, public health, medicine, nursing, dental hygiene, law, business, we all work together quite a bit to help support each other. And that has created an incentive for not only people to heal, but to become experts in different fields, to become leaders. And we're now at the point where at Manoa, I think we've doubled. I think we're about 14 or 15% Kanaka Maoli, and we have many more services, Native Hawaiian student services, and more communication, more Native Hawaiian faculty, more people becoming tenured. So there's more stability and more permanency. And some of the social justice fulfillment has to do with us trying to get the next generation into legacy positions where they are continuing the work and changing policies and making everything more in alignment and relevant to their lifetime, what's coming up, not only with climate change and sustainability, but the health needs of all people of Hawaii.
So it relates to what the UH system is doing and all of that, right? I mean, that's what, in terms of ʻIKE PONO.
Very much so.
Yeah. I want to throw a monkey wrench here.
Oh no.
So the UH is like supporting those kinds of initiatives, right? And then we know that there's all kinds of pilikia also, between Native Hawaiians and the university on other issues like the TMT, 30-meter telescope, for instance. That's the monkey wrench right here. And so how would one reconcile how the UH system is doing with all these things, right? And presumably these are like moving in terms of what the tribunal is saying, or has said. And then what the actions of the UHManoa regarding the 30-meter, telescope. Any ideas?
Well,
that's the monkey wrench. I mean, I just
I'll leave
mentioned
it to
that.
Nalani.
in indigenous culture, our relationship to Aina, whether it's the mauna or a stream or a bird or a forest, you know, the water in all of its different forms is so personal.
Mm-hmm.
And so the protectors of those places have very serious and profound kuleana.
Mm-hmm.
So those that are aligning with Mauna Kea on that level, anything done to disturb or damage the mauna is to them the same as damaging all life, you know, damaging human life too. But I think what becomes really the basis of political struggles is that there are different opinions and different alignments that are made by people who have a completely different perspective. So the university may have a perspective on the money that's going to be made or the technology of astronomy and science. So this is why these kinds of conflicts come up. But I feel like there has to be a discussion amongst Kanaka Maoli about whose kuleana it is also, because each island and each community also has their own kuleana, and then we have the more universal kuleana for all of us. So I think the processes that are taking place now and the people that are showing the courage to give voice to advocate for Mauna Kea not to be used in a position of either as a profit incentive or as a way to discourage Kanaka Maoli to our connection to protecting the Aina. That all of those discussions are very, very important. One of the things that's really different, and the tribunal brought this up, between indigenous governance, self-governance, and something even like democracy, is that it's not about one person, one vote, and however the vote lands in a majority, then that's the right thing to do. We have an understanding of what is PONO on a na'au'au level. So on that na'au'au level, we're being inspired by our kupuna. We're listening to the effects that have already been shown. Are they damaging or not? Are they leading to this level of lack of capacity to support life? And so it's a very deep question for all of us. And as John said, you know, in ancient times when there were family systems and not so much hierarchical governments or the kingdom law or ali'i, but just the family systems themselves, there were councils called the aha councils. And this is way beyond any concept of one person, one vote democracy. It's that each aspect of life is represented by the families or the people who are fishing or who are gathering or who are tending to or who are creating the paths or the houses or the food, you know, doing the cultivation. And when these decisions are made, they're made with everyone represented. So all the areas of life and of cultural knowledge and wisdom are represented together, and the decisions are made based upon a completely different basis of relationship. So it's something that has to be understood as a huge difference between our worldview. I did want to say something, though, just in support of what Ulla was talking about. Many of us have traveled throughout the Pacific or, you know, have global connections, and with sustainability and climate change, it's affecting everyone on the earth. So there's a lot of science and new knowledge coming from different parts of the world. Like in the Netherlands, they're showing people all over the world how to build canals and to absorb some of the shock of flooding and things like that. I know Kamana Beamer invites some friends of his from Germany, because in Germany, they adore farming. You know, they revere that people have this knowledge of pattern recognition as farmers too. And so the life of the land and the water that's needed there often goes first. There's priorities to farming. There are precautionary principles that the UN has looked at into how do you make decisions so that you don't destroy the capacity of life. And I had one example because Ulla took me to meet with the Inuit from Greenland. And they gave me this book that is the mapping of all of their lands according to every aspect of life on Greenland. And then showing the spawning times or the migration or when things sprout or when things, are growing, the amount of time that there is without such heavy snow that you have in order to harvest certain areas, but keeping all of that within the understanding of the human relationship to all those different areas of life. And I think some of our new scientists and Aina ecologists are creating that sort of picture for us, restoring whole ahupua'a systems so that we can relate to systems of life that we are part of.
Yeah, actually that's important because mapping really makes you study the Aina where you live and be more in tune with it, so that in terms of planning for the community, you are on solid ground in terms of science and knowledge about your space, And
know your kuleana.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an important thing. We mentioned some things about the Pacific nations in terms of climate change and so forth, and we related it to, the tribunal and what's happening right now. But much of that actually depends on, we always say something like colonization of the mind, even if some Pacific Island nations have been independent politically, they're still having the philosophy or even knowledge that Western knowledge that many almost always conflicts with indigenous knowledge and so forth. So the idea of sustainability, fighting climate change, etc., has to, as we have been talking, has to do with indigenous knowledge, indigenous philosophy as well. And so what is then the relationship between decolonization strategies, or as you call them, self-decolonization strategies, and to prepare us for fighting for sustainability and against, the changes that, are because of changes in climate, etc., changes to our own environments, So what's the relationship between self-decolonization of the mind and those kinds of activities that people, Pacific Islanders deal with?
Well, I think one of the things we're really actively involved in at Manoa is building conscious awareness of what indigenous knowledge is. And Punihei is now the director of an office for the Native Hawaiian Place of Learning and the Aloha Aina University concepts. And she's created a truth and reconciliation and then transformation curriculum where people can study all of these things in small groups and discuss and create more of a conscious awareness of how all of us could represent the Aloha Aina University, it's in UH, but also the deeper knowledge of indigenous peoples. And we want to actually have a series where we can invite her and students and scientists and other Kanaka Maoli and faculty who are doing the kind of work that Ulla's been doing too in sustainability and climate change, so that we can have from the perspective of future generations what they feel needs to be done at this time.
Yeah, well, that's good. In terms of self-decolonization as well, we were talking before the show a little bit about, and I mentioned Rapa Nui and Tahiti and Guam, and you mentioned our Marshall Islands and a lot of other places that are really threatened but also still colonized. So in terms of this decolonization, So they need to be decolonized in terms of gaining independence, but also to do so and privilege indigenous knowledge to, that knowledge, Western knowledge that does not really, or relegates indigenous knowledge to the bottom of things, etc. So could you talk about that kind of relationship?
So if you're not in control of your own government and your own policies, it's very hard to do the right things in terms of preparing, being resilient, adaptive if we have to be, for climate change, for instance. But if you're also not ready to open your mind to the knowledge around you, then you might actually lock yourself in and prevent new ways, different ways of dealing with climate change. So maybe we're not building dikes, but we are going to a point where we can learn from many indigenous cultures of repurposing areas, let it flow and restore. As we have seen a lot in Hawaii, but also other places.
And building the relationships between indigenous nations, recognizing each other as nations, perhaps treaties will come, alliances, agreements, changes, exchanging economies, food, relying upon each other throughout the Pacific region or in other parts of the world, so that it strengthens not only what the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples lays as minimum standards for in the international law level, but in terms of how we adapt and face climate change and the solutions that we come together to create.
Yeah. So we have, sorry, a couple of minutes. No, I want to go to you, actually, in terms of, question of students who are interested in this kind of thing, and they really are out in the community and want to do a lot of stuff and learn about what they study in school from the community, whether, it is, in the water or it's, in the ahupua'a and all of that. So could you say something about that, and then we can move from there?
From my experience, there is a really strong interest among students. And of course, I don't see all students, but I see a lot of different students because ethnic studies is somewhat functioning as an elective department. And generally, there is a very strong concern about the future, about sustainability, about what climate change is doing to our lives. So I have been working for quite some years with Krista Heiser, for instance, from the UH System Office for Sustainability, that clearly has the thinking that we need to integrate sustainability across a curriculum.
Good.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Good. So we have about 20 seconds left. Nalani, no, this is good. How would you wrap it up for us in terms of the tribunal and what's happening right now?
Nature has a right to life.
Okay, actually we're flat out of time. And so mahalo Nalani, mahalo Ulla for coming and sharing all this with us. And we definitely will do more programs on that, as we have done on indigenous peoples in the Pacific, the Marshallese and Micronesians in general, and all of that, and even about civic engagement, etc. So thank you again, mahalo nui loa, and thank you, mahalo nui loa, for our viewers, and see you in the fall. Aloha.
Aloha.